Chalachitta vritti vinivartan aushadam sharanam yatindra charanam vrinimahe. Nevertheless, it becomes clear that the framework of the poem does not allow for a predominant focus on the analogy between Ramanuja and Krishna, nor that his feet themselves are the predominant upaya for moksha. In summing up what we see of the representation of Ramanuja in just these two poems, the one composed in Tamil, the other in Sanskrit, separated by centuries, we see that there is a strong hagiographical tradition following upon already the Guru Paramparas that emerged from the 12th century onwards, and the various commentaries with hagiographical elements on the Divya Prabandham, that reaffirms Ramanuja's divine descent, similar to the divine descent of the Arvas. It is less uniformly codified, though, as to in what or in who to locate this descent, in Krishna himself, in Vishvaksena, or the weapons of the Blessed Lord. It is also equally clear that from early on that the Sri Vaishnava tradition was united in seeing Ramanuja as central for the salvific process, and that to take refuge with him would accelerate the path to Vaikuntha and Kainkarya or service. Nevertheless, the frequent references to Ramanuja's destroying one's sins, a reference pricking up directly on the central promise of the Charama Shloka, is not absent, but does not function as the fulcrum of the Yatiraja Saptatihi, as it does in the Ramanuja Nutrandadi. Here, I take as a point of reference and contention an excellent article written by Patricia Mummy in the Journal of the Anantacharya Indological Research Institute in 1998. In this article, which deals with the evolution of the Tengale understanding of the Acharya, Mummy makes the following suggestions. She says first that Ramanuja is understood as the savior of the entire Sri Vaishnava lineage in the Yatiraja Vimshati and Arti Prabandham of Manavala Mamunigal, though there might be hints of such a position in earlier poetic work like the Ramanuja Nutrandadi of Tirarangata Mudanar. Secondly, she says, though we have a work, the Charamopai Nirnaya of Nayanar Achan Pillai, the nephew and adopted son of Periyavachan Pillai, that clearly endorses the view that taking refuge with Ramanuja himself is central to salvation, thus making it a doctrinal position found well before Manavala Mamuni. This must be regarded with caution, and the attribution of the work of this author questioned. Mummy's arguments for doubting this could be the work of Nayanar Achan Pillai is not dissimilar to the controversy regarding Ramanuja's authorship of the Gadyatrayam, which of course Frank Clooney has gone into in some length already in his paper, so I don't have to do this. But I would just like to reiterate what I said with regard to the Gadyatrayam when we are evaluating or looking at the work of individual acharyas within the tradition. We must never forget that the Sri Vaishnava acharyas were responding to both an internal or an intramural and an external or extramural audience in different languages for different purposes, using different genres and stylistic registers and levels of erudition. This becomes remarkably obvious when we survey the works of Vedanta Deshiga and the linguistic stylistic differences and levels of doctrinal complexity that separates a work such as the Tattvamukta Kalapa from a Tiruchinnamale. Thus, we have no choice but to broaden the criteria for judging an author's conceptual terminology and for seeing the intellectual history of the Sri Vaishnava tradition as moving not in a straight linear line of development, had become accepted doctrine in at least one important strand of the tradition shortly after his postulated dates. The doctrinal musings on Ramanuja are central to a theme that lies at the heart of the tradition. The issue of how to reconfigure the nature of gods and the religious canon's own accessibility to the community of ordinary devotees over historical time. Succinctly put, the literature of the Sri Vaishnava tradition has repeatedly reconfigured the motive of accessibility to enable the incorporation both of doctrinal change and to allow for canonical expansion. Thus, the central argument in the equation of the Divya Prabandham and the Vedas is one of the accessibility of Vedic revelation in a manner that overcomes linguistic, caste, and gender boundaries. We see this elaborated in great detail for the first time in NGS Arairappadi Vyakyanam on the Thiruvaimuri, and then more radically reiterated in the Acharya Hridayam of Alagiya Manavala Perumal Nayanar. The Ramanuja Nutrandadi is also drawing upon this very same theme of accessibility, suggesting that Ramanuja's feet provide the same refuge in this age, the Kali Yuga, that Lord Krishna's did in the Dwapara Yuga. The further salient feature of the tradition has been that the devotional poetry composed not just by the Arvas, but later the Acharyas, is as central as commentaries and independent works to the evolution of doctrine. For the poetry adds new dimension and facets to it with the imperative of stressing God's constant salvific accessibility. To conclude, it is no mere coincidence that both the Vadagalai and Tengalai Nitya Anusandanam texts begin with the pool of the common Taniyans, which Sri Vaishnavas are encouraged to recite on a daily basis. Both contain Kuratarvan's Taniyan that ends with the words all of us know, Asmad Guror Bhagavatosya Dhaika Sindho Ramanujasya Charanau Sharanam Prapadye. This convergence in Udayava speaks for his centrality as the pendant in the necklace of the Guru Parampara, as both Thiru Arangatta Mudanar and Vedanta Deshika say in their poetry. A pendant that holds together, gives structure to, and makes resplendent not just the individual beads of the necklace, but indeed, as the acharyas who are likened to the beads of the necklace themselves would say, adorning and forming the dazzling central gemstone of the entire tradition. Thank you.
Thank you, Srilata. And as you know, the multiple mappings continue in the tradition with Ramanuja also as Sankarshana, and therefore the Balarama Ananta mapping. One minor question is, at times you were talking about analogy, and at other times you were talking about an identification. Was there anything on that turns on how to interpret the mapping? But the larger question for me is, what has the tradition gained by leaving intact these multiple mappings, rather than, say, simply make an identification, a deification of Ramanuja as Krishna, say? Why has it left it? Now, it cannot just be, although partially it might be the case that this is like a historical palimpsest, there were layers, but when the same text in virtually adjacent verses gives you different such mappings, it shows that it wants to preserve so many of these ways of reconceiving Ramanuja in these terms, sometimes as the Lord, sometimes as the Lord's accessory, sometimes as another deity, and so on. What is the general theory that is going on here for this very profound move? What has the tradition gained by keeping them all there as if they were, as it were, simultaneously true?
Okay, Ram, thank you for these very excellent questions, which leave me actually, I can't say I have at this point an answer, at least to your second question, which is something that I'm pondering. I would prefer, with regard to the first question, to use the word analogy. Maybe I'm being more imprecise when I use identification, because, it is, I think, even in the Ramanuja Nutrandadi, it is about indirection. It is about the many references to, Ramanuja, rather than to say, you are my own, you are Mayavan or something. So that is a relatively clear issue. And I would say with the Yatiraja Saptati that it is the same situation. But with the multiple, the multiple identification of Ramanuja, I am both intrigued, and I still do not, I think I would need to do much more of a mapping and also really see the evolution of the identifications, the Guru Paramparas, and in also the later Stotra literature. I'm sure there are some eminent scholars here who have probably already done this and who would be able to address the issue of why are we leaving? Why is there not a convergence in identifying him, say, only with Vishwaksena? Well, I think that in terms of the genre of poetry, I mean, certainly the way Yatiraja Saptati works is, it is almost, I think the aesthetic feel of the poem is to provide for the spectrum of relishing of relishing the qualities of Ramanuja. So I think it is both doctrine and not doctrine. I mean, if you see what I mean. It is, if we have to understand his beauty, we actually cannot reduce it. I think that would in fact be the whole aesthetic motive of the poem, in leaving open many possibilities. And that is why in fact I quoted one of my favorite verses on how in effect he is not just Vishwaksena or Dattatreya Maharishi, but he's in fact like the mountain and the Balasurya or the sheltering tree. So I think the multifaceted sort of brilliance is what the poem clearly aims at. It's only, I think, partially answers what you're getting at, which I think needs to be further explored.
Are these incidents mentioned at least remotely in any of the poems that you have mentioned?
Sir, I think definitely not in the two poems. There is no attempt to, I think, refer to. What is interesting for me about both the poems is they are not dealing with the figure of Ramanuja in the way the Guru Paramparas are dealing with him. It's a very different way of representing him.
There is also one standard work, Ramanuja Ashtabadi. It is in Sanskrit. It is excellent work. It is more or less same like that famous Ashtabadi.
Yes. Thank you. No, I thank you so much for the reference. I would obviously like to know the date. I myself, when I started thinking about this paper, of course there are many, many more stotras on Ramanuja. I was able to identify several more, and I think one of my intentions in the longer run is actually to look at several of these different works, because there was an entire tradition of composing poetry on him.
So let's thank Professor Srilata Raman for it.
I thank Professor M.D. Srinivas for chairing this session and completing the whole thing in time. I am so grateful to you, Professor, and thanks to Professor Clooney and Professor Srilata Raman for brilliant presentations. With this, we end this session, and before we go for lunch, I would like to honor all our guests, all our speakers and chairpersons with a small Tanjavur painting gift. And I would like to request our President, Dr. Gopalaswamy, to present. Please take a photograph. Yeah. And Dr. Sucharita Adluri, please come over. We're not there. That is not there. Like we have not organized that way. Only 30 we got. Yeah. Dr. Narasimhan. Professor M.D. Srinivas, please, sir. Professor Francis Clooney, please. And Professor Srilata Raman. Friends, with this we end this session. We adjourn for lunch. and lunch will be served in second floor in philosophy department. All are requested to join us for lunch. Thank you. We'll assemble back here by 2 o'clock.